Tonight, we step into a tale long forgotten. Imagine standing on a flat rooftop, the air cool and heavy with the scent of a slow-moving river. Below you, a city of mud and straw is just beginning to stir, holding its breath before the heat of the day takes hold. In our modern world, we are used to everything happening all at once. We tap a screen and a package arrives. We press a button and the lights flood the room. But here, in the ancient cradle of civilization, time moves with the heavy, patient rhythm of the Euphrates River. Nothing is instant. Every thread, every brick, every loaf of bread is a slow, deliberate victory against the desert. Settle in, get comfortable, and if you'd like more stories, you can always subscribe. Now, lower the lights, let the room grow calm, and together we'll slip into tonight's story. The world is quiet, beautifully, deeply quiet. It is that precise moment before dawn, when the sky is not quite dark, but not yet light. It is a deep, bruised purple, hanging over the flat plains of Sumer. Here, in the great city of yore, the silence is thick, broken only by the occasional bark of a stray dog or the soft lapping of water against the reeds in the distance. Our weaver is asleep. He lies on a woven reed mat spread out across the floor of his small, square bedroom. The room is tiny, really, just a niche tucked into the thick mud brick walls of his family home. It is cool in here. The thick walls, baked hard by 1,000 suns, do a wonderful job of keeping the blistering heat of yesterday out, and holding the chill of the desert night in. He breathes slowly, a rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, matching the slow pulse of the city around him. There is no jarring alarm clock to shatter the peace, no beeping phone to demand his attention. If you are the sort of person who likes to hit the snooze button 4 or 5 times, you might find the ancient Mesopotamian wake-up call a bit subtle. It is simply the light, slowly, imperceptibly. The purple in the sky begins to bleed into a soft, hazy grey. The first birds begin to sing, tiny, fluttering things that nest in the eaves of the houses. The weaver shifts. The reed mat is sturdy, smelling faintly of dried grass and earth, but it is not exactly a feather pillow. He stretches, his hands brushing against the rough plaster of the wall. His fingers are calloused, the skin thickened by years of handling rough wool and snapping threads, but we will get to that later. For now, he is just a man waking up. He sits up and rubs the sleep from his eyes. The house is built around a central open courtyard, a common design that historians verify was used to trap cool air, a sort of ancient air conditioning without the hum or the electricity bill. He steps out of his room and onto the wooden gallery that overlooks this courtyard. The air here is fresh, carrying the unmistakable scent of the river. That mix of wet clay, fish, and sweet water. He walks to a large clay jar resting in the corner. He dips a small bowl into it, splashing the cool water onto his face. It wakes him up better than any espresso could. Speaking of which, if you were hoping for a double-shot latte to start the day, you would be out of luck here. The morning beverage of choice is not coffee or even tea, but a thick, porridge-like beer, often drunk through a straw to filter out the holes. It is an acquired taste, perhaps, but it certainly gets you moving, quietly. So as not to wake the rest of the household, the weaver climbs the narrow wooden ladder that leads up to the flat roof of the house. This is the best place to be in the morning. As his head pops up above the parapet, the full scope of the city reveals itself. Yore is waking up to the east. The horizon is beginning to glow with a burning, molten orange. The light spills across the flat landscape, racing toward the city walls. And there, looming over everything like a man-made mountain, is the great ziggurat. It is massive, a tiered pyramid of brick reaching toward the gods. In the growing light, its walls turn a deep, rich red. It is the house of Nana, the moon god, the patron of this city. It is said that the god actually lives there, in the little temple perched at the very top, sleeping in a bed made of gold. Our weaver pauses for a moment, bowing his head slightly in respect. It is best not to start the day by ignoring the neighbors, especially when the neighbor is a divine being who controls the tides. The view from this rooftop is endless. You can see the network of canals that slice through the city like silver veins, bringing life to the dusty streets. Historians still argue whether the residential streets of yore were carefully planned by a central committee, or if they just grew organically, twisting and turning wherever a family decided to build a wall, looking down at the maze below with its narrow, winding alleyways that barely allow two people to pass. It certainly feels like the city just grew, wild and free, like ivy climbing a tree. Smoke begins to curl up from the courtyards of other houses. The smell of burning dung and wood drifting on the breeze signals that breakfast fires are being lit. The weaver takes a deep breath. There is a smell here that is unique to this part of the world. The smell of bitumen. It is a sticky, black, tar-like substance that bubbles up naturally from the ground. They use it for everything here. Mortar for bricks, waterproofing for boats, even setting jewelry. It has a sharp, chemical temps that mixes with the smell of baking bread. It is the scent of industry. He stretches his arms high above his head, working out the stiffness in his shoulders. Weaving is hard work. It is physically demanding in a way most of us sit-down workers can barely imagine. It requires a strong back and steady arms. He looks down at his hands again. Today, these hands will weave thousands of threads. They will create order out of chaos, but the city is not just a place of work. It is a place of life. Below him, in the street, a door creaks open. A merchant, leading a donkey laden with baskets, starts his trek toward the harbor. The donkey brays, a loud soaring sound that echoes off the mud brick walls. It is the ancient equivalent of a car honking in traffic. Annoying, but a sign that the rush hour has begun. The sun finally breaks free of the horizon, hitting the whitewashed walls of the weaver's house. The light is sudden and brilliant. It transforms the grey mud into gold. The shadows stretch long and thin across the roof. It is time. He turns and climbs back down the ladder, the wood polished smooth by years of use. He steps into the courtyard, where the rest of the house is stirring. A child giggles from behind a curtain. A pot clatters. The rhythm of the day has officially started. He moves toward his workspace, a shaded corner of the courtyard where his tools wait for him. They are silent now, dormant wood and stone, waiting for his touch to bring them to life. There is a calmness to him. He does not rush. In a world without digital clocks ticking down the seconds, the sun is the only timekeeper that matters. And the sun has only just arrived. He has the whole day ahead of him. A day of rhythm, of repetition, and of creation. The weaver takes his seat on a low wooden stool. He runs a hand over the frame of his loom. It is cool to the touch. He is ready. The city of yore is awake. The river is flowing, and the first thread is waiting to be touched. To weave, one first needs something to weave with. It is a simple truth, but one that requires a journey. Our weaver leaves the cool, shadowed safety of his courtyard and steps out into the narrow street. The sun is higher now, and the shadows are shortening, pulling back like a receding tide to reveal the dusty ground. He walks with a steady, unhurried gait, his sandals slapping softly against the packed earth. He is heading toward the city gates, toward the edge of the world he knows. The streets of yore are a labyrinth. High walls on either side block out the view, creating a canyon of brick. But as he walks, the air changes. The smell of baking bread and wood smoke gives way to something earthier, something muskier. It is the scent of the open fields drifting in on the breeze. He navigates the winding alleyways until the great city wall looms ahead, a massive fortification of mud brick that stands as a silent guardian against the chaos of the wild. Passing through the gate is like stepping through a veil. The noise of the city, the potters, the shouting merchants, the crying children fades into the background, replaced by a different kind of sound. It is a low, rolling sound, like the rumbling of distant thunder, but softer. It is the sound of thousands of sheep. Out here, on the dusty plains, just beyond the city walls, the shepherds have arrived. They come from the wilder lands, the grazing pastures that stretch out toward the horizon. These men look different from the city dwellers. Their skin is darker, weathered deep bronze by the relentless sun. Their robes are simpler, rougher, woven from the very wool they carry. They stand leaning on long wooden staffs, watching their flocks with eyes that are used to scanning the horizon for wolves or lions. And the sheep, they are everywhere. A sea of bobbing heads and woolly backs. These are not quite the sheep you might picture grazing on a green hillside in a modern storybook. These are the ancient ancestors of those breeds, sturdy and resilient. Most distinctive of all, they are fat-tailed sheep. Their tails are heavy and broad, storing reserves of fat that help them survive the lean times when the grass withers in the heat. It is a biological pantry carried right behind them. The weaver approaches a group of shepherds he knows. There is a ritual to this meeting. No business happens immediately. First, there are greetings. Hands are clasped. Inquiries are made about the health of families, the state of the pastures, the level of the river. In this slow-moving world, relationships are the lubricant of trade. You cannot buy good wool from a man you do not respect. The wool itself is piled in great mounds on reed mats. It does not look like the pristine white balls of yarn you see in a craft store bin. This is raw fleece, fresh from the animal. It is heavy, dense, and distinctly greasy. It is rich with lanolin, the natural oil that protects the sheep's skin from the harsh weather. If you were to plunge your hand into the pile, your fingers would come away coated in a thick, waxy substance. It smells intense, a mix of animal, musk, dry grass, and the sweet, heavy scent of the grease itself. To the weaver, this is the smell of potential. It is the smell of a blank canvas. He crouches down to inspect a fleece. He pulls a tuft loose, testing the staple length, the length of the individual fibers. He rubs it between his thumb and forefinger, feeling for the crimp, that natural zigzag in the hair that gives wool its elasticity. He is looking for strength. He is looking for softness. It is interesting to note how this wool was harvested. In the very oldest days, long before our weaver was born, wool wasn't sheared off with blades. It was rude or plucked. During the spring molt, the sheep would naturally shed their winter coats, and people would gently pull the loose tufts away by hand. It was a painless, if tedious, process. But today, our weaver sees the marks of bronze knives. The invention of metal shears changed everything. allowing the shepherds to take the fleece in one continuous piece, like a coat being unzipped. A peculiar debate still circles among those who study this era. Historians still argue whether these vast flocks belonged entirely to the temple priest's part of a massive centralized command economy, where every single sheep was a ward of the state, or if independent herders, like the ones we see here, could build their own private fortunes. Was the weaver buying from a free agent, or was this merely a distribution of state resources? It's hard to say. The clay tablets tell us about quotas and rations, but they are often silent on the quiet, dusty deals made in the shadow of the city walls. Regardless of who owns the sheep, the transaction proceeds. The weaver selects his bundles. He is looking for the creamy white wool, which is the easiest to dye, but there are other shades here too: natural russets, deep browns, and even blacks. He avoids the hairy, coarse outer coat of the older animals, preferring the soft undercoat. Payment is settled. There are no coins here. Money, as we know it, hasn't been invented yet. Instead, silver is weighed out. The weaver carries a small pouch of silver coils and rings. He brings out a small balance scale. Into one pan goes a stone weight-pert, shaped like a duck, a common form for weights in Mesopotamia. Into the other go the scraps of silver, until the arm of the scale floats perfectly level. It is a moment of pure physics and trust. The shepherds help him load the bundles of raw wool into a large basket he has brought with him. It is immensely heavy. Raw wool is roughly 50% dirt, grease, and vegetable matter. He is carrying the weight of the pasture home with him. As he hoists the basket onto his shoulder, adjusting the strap across his forehead to distribute the load, he takes a moment to look back at the flock. The sheep are calm now, some lying down in the dust, chewing their cud with that rhythmic, sideways grind of the jaw. They are the engine of this city's wealth. We often think of gold or grain as the great treasures of the ancient world, but here wool is king. It is the fiber that clothes the people, from the lowest slave to the highest priest. It is the primary export that travels up the river to distant lands where wood and stone are traded in return. The weaver turns back toward the gate. The sun is hot on his back now. The return journey is slower, burdened by the weight of the harvest. He walks past the guards at the gate, who barely glance at him. A man carrying wool is as common a sight as a bird carrying a twig. Back inside the city walls, the shade of the narrow streets is a welcome relief. The noise of the sheep fades behind him, replaced once again by the human hum of yore. He feels the lanolin seeping through his tunic, where the basket rests against his shoulder. His own clothes will smell of the flock for the rest of the day. It is a comforting scent, a reminder of the connection between the wild fields and the civilized loom. He reaches his door and kicks it. Open with a sandaled foot, he moves into the courtyard and drops the heavy basket onto the floor with a dull thud. Dust motes dance in the shaft of sunlight that cuts across the room. The first step is done. He has the material. But looking at this greasy, tangled, dirty mass of hair, it is hard to imagine it becoming a fine, flowing robe. Nature has done her part, growing the fiber. Now, human hands must take over. The transformation is about to begin. The basket of raw wool sits in the center of the courtyard, a silent, chaotic mountain of potential. It is a mess of tangles, burrs, and dust. If you were to look at it, you might wonder how it could ever become something smooth and orderly. But the transformation from nature to culture is not the work of the weaver. That task belongs to the women of the household. They gather in the shaded part of the courtyard, where the woven mats have been spread out. It is a social time, a moment for the family to come together. There is the weaver's wife, perhaps his mother, and a couple of daughters who are learning the craft by watching. They settle onto the ground, their long linen skirts tucking around their legs. In the ancient world, the textile industry is the engine of the economy, but the fuel for that engine is female labor. First, the wool must be teased. Fingers, nimble and practiced, dive into the greasy mass. They pull apart the clumps, picking out the bits of dried grass, the small twigs, and the little burrs that the sheep picked up while wandering the plains. It is a slow, methodical grooming. It is not unlike the way primates groom one another, a quiet, bonding activity that serves a practical purpose. They chat quietly as they work, their voices low and melodic, mixing with the rustle of the dry fibers. Once the wool is picked clean of the worst debris, it must be aligned. Today, we might use wire brushes called cards, but here they use comb-stiff, toothed tools made of wood or perhaps bone. They drag the wool through the teeth, over and over again. It sounds like a rhythmic scratching. Shek, shek. The chaotic, jumbled cloud of fleece begins to surrender. The fibers are coaxed into lying parallel to one another, side by side, like soldiers standing in formation. And now, a little trick of the trade, a quirky detail that you won't often see in museum dioramas. To prepare the fibers for the spindle, the women take small handfuls of this combed wool and roll them against their thigh. They use the palm of their hand, pressing down and rolling the wool against the skin of their leg. The friction and the warmth of the skin help to twist the fibers just slightly, creating a loose, fluffy snake of wool called a roving. It is said that over time, this constant rolling would leave the women with one leg perfectly smooth and hairless. A strange occupational mark of the spinster dot. With a pile of these fluffy rovings ready, the true magic begins. It is time for the spindle. The spindle is a deceptively simple tool. It is nothing more than a slender wooden shaft, perhaps the length of a forearm, with a round weight attached to it. This weight is called a whirl. In this household, the whirl is made of fired clay, painted with a simple geometric design. It gives the spindle momentum, allowing it to keep spinning like a top. The weaver's wife picks up her spindle. She attaches the end of a roving to the shaft and gives it a sharp twist with her thumb and forefinger. The spindle drops. It hangs suspended in the air, spinning rapidly, a blur of motion. As it spins, it travels down toward the ground, and the magic happens. The twist travels up the thread, grabbing the loose, fluffy fibers of the roving and binding them together. It is a hypnotic dance. Her left hand holds the fluff, gently drafting it out, pulling it just enough to thin it down, but not so much that it breaks. Her right hand manages the spindle. Twist, drop, spin. The wood hums as it were. When the spindle almost touches the ground, she catches it in her palm, winds the newly created thread around the shaft, and starts again. Draft, twist, drop, wind, draft, twist, drop, wind. It is a rhythm that has been the heartbeat of households for thousands of years. It is a motion so ingrained in muscle memory that she doesn't even need to look at her hands. She can watch the children playing in the corner. She can keep an eye on the cooking pot, all while her fingers perform this endless, complex physics equation of tension and torsion. There is a fascinating disproportion here, a mainstream historical fact that dictates the pace of the ancient world. It takes a massive amount of time to spin thread. To keep just one weaver busy at his loom, it requires the constant work of 5 to 7 spinners. the weaver can consume in a day what took a week to create. This is why the spindle is never far from a woman's hand. Walking to the market, she is spinning, watching the sheep, spinning, sitting by the fire, spinning. Every scrap of free time is converted into thread in the corner of the courtyard. One of the younger girls is using a small ceramic bowl. She rests the tip of her spindle in the bowl as she spins it, rather than letting it drop through the air. This supported spinning is perfect for very fine, delicate threads that might snap under the weight of a heavy drop spindle. The spindle pirouettes in the bowl like a tiny dancer, making a soft whir sound against the fired clay. Historians still argue whether the vast textile output of cities like yore was produced entirely in massive temple, workshop, factories where hundreds of women worked for rations, or if a putting out system was more common, where raw wool was distributed to homes like this one, and finished thread was collected later. Looking at this scene, with the family working together in the shade of their own home, it feels likely that both systems existed side by side. The home was a factory, and the factory was a home. As the morning wears on, the pile of finished yarn grows. It is no longer the greasy, dirty grey of the raw fleece. It is now a creamy, consistent thread, wound into tight balls. It is strong. You could tug on it, and it would not break. The chaotic fluff has been disciplined into a line. The weaver, passing by on his way to check his loom, pauses to watch. There is a deep appreciation in his eyes. He knows that his work is only as good as theirs. If the thread is lumpy, his cloth will be lumpy. If the thread is weak, his warp will snap. He picks up a ball of the new yarn, squeezing it. It has a springiness to it, a life. It still smells faintly of the sheep, that earthy lanolin scent, but it also smells of the hands that made it. The sun climbs higher, heating the courtyard, but the rhythm does not break. The sound of the spindle whirls acting as flywheels, the soft shee of the drafting fibers, the low murmur of conversation. It creates a trance-like atmosphere. It is boring, perhaps, to a modern mind that craves constant stimulation. But there is a peace in it. It is the peace of knowing exactly what you are doing, and seeing the tangible result of your labor pile up beside you by the time the sun hits its zenith. The mountain of raw wool has shrunk significantly, replaced by a pyramid of yarn balls. They sit there, pale and ghostly, waiting for the next stage of their journey. They are naked now, stripped of their dirt, but also colorless. They are ready to be born into the world of color. But for now, the spindles slow and finally stop. The women shake out their hands, stretching fingers that have been dancing for hours. The courtyard goes quiet, save for the buzzing of a fly and the distant sound of the river flowing endlessly on. The thread is spun, strong and even, but it is paler ghostly, creamy white that reflects the harsh Mesopotamian sun. To become something truly valuable, something that speaks of status and beauty, it must be transformed. And for that, our weaver must leave the quiet sanctity of his home and venture into a different part of the city. He gathers the skeins of yarn, looping them over his arm like great, soft necklaces, and heads out. He walks toward the industrial district, often located downwind from the main residential areas. As he gets closer, his nose tells him he is going the right way. It is a pungent smell, a sharp, biting aroma of mordants and stale urine, mixed with the earthy, boiling scent of roots and crushed insects. This is the quarter of the dyers, the alchemists of color. The dyeing workshop is a chaotic, steamy place. It is open to the sky, for the fumes can be overwhelming, but shaded by reed mats to protect the workers from the direct glare. The ground is stained in 1,000 hue splashes of dried indigo, puddles of rusty red, streaks of ochre yellow. It looks as if a rainbow has crashed and shattered here. Dominating the space are great clay vats, sunk deep into the ground to keep them stable and to help retain the heat. Beneath them, fires smolder, fed by dried dung and scrub wood. The air shimmers with heat and steam. Men move among the vats, their arms stained up to the elbows in the colors of their trade. They look like demons or gods, their skin marked by the magic they perform. Our weaver approaches the master dyer, a man whose hands are permanently stained a deep, bruised purple. They exchange a few words, shouting over the roar of the fires and the bubbling of the pots. The weaver hands over his white yarn. He wants red today, a deep, rich red. Red is a color of power, of life, of blood. But getting it is not simple. The dyer leads him to a vat that smells particularly organic. This is the madder root bath. Madder is a plant that grows in the marshy areas. Its roots, when crushed and boiled, release a pigment called a but you can't just dip the wool in and hope for the best. If you did, the color would wash out the first time the garment touched water. First, the wool must be more. This is the chemical trick, the handshake between the fiber and the dye. The wool is soaked in a solution of alum, a naturally occurring mineral salt found in the desert regions. The alum bites into the wool. The word mordant actually comes from the French word mordre, to bite. It opens up the microscopic scales of the hair and creates a chemical bridge. It makes the wool hungry for color. After the alum bath, the yarn is lowered into the bubbling red cauldron. The dyer uses a long wooden stick to gently prod the skeins, ensuring they are fully submerged but not tangled. He moves with a slow, hypnotic stir. If he agitates it too much, the wool will felt, turning into a solid, unusable mat. If he stirs too little, the color will be uneven. It is a delicate balance, maintained by years of intuition, while the red is simmering. The weaver wanders over to look at another vat. This one is cold, and it has a strange coppery scum floating on the surface. This is the indigo vat. Indigo is a magical dye, perhaps the most mysterious of all. The plant itself is green. The dye bath is a yellowish green. But when the wool is pulled out of the vat, a miraculous thing happens. A worker lifts a skein of dripping wet yarn from the indigo pot. It emerges looking yellow-green, like sickly swamp water. But as the air hits it, as the oxygen kisses the wet fibers, the color transforms before your eyes. It deepens, turning from green to teal, and then, within seconds, to a rich, profound blue. It is like watching the sky darken at twilight, captured in a bundle of string. This oxidation process feels like sorcery, even to those who watch it every day. There is a quirky, slightly less pleasant detail about the dyeing process that historians often gloss over. To adjust the pH of the dye baths, to make them alkaline enough for certain colors to take. The ancients used the most readily available source of ammonia, stale urine. Pots were often left out on street corners for passers-by to contribute to. It was an early, and somewhat smelly, form of civic recycling. That sharp temps in the air. That is the scent of chemistry at work. Historians still argue whether the legendary purple, the color of royalty made from crushing thousands of Murex sea snails, was being produced this far inland at this specific time, or if the deep purples seen in yore were actually clever imitations created by double dyeing with indigo and madder. It is a debate of economics versus chemistry. Real Murex purple was worth more than its weight in gold. A clever dyer who could fake it with roots and leaves could make a handsome profit, provided the king didn't notice the difference. The weaver watches as his yarn is lifted from the madder vat. It is a triumphant moment. The pale, ghostly loops have vanished, replaced by heavy, dripping ropes of crimson. They look like glistening mussels. The workers carry them to the rinsing area, where they are plunged into troughs of clear river water to wash away the excess dye and the alum. The water turns pink as it flows away, a little stream of color returning to the earth. Finally, the skeins are wrung out. Two men insert sticks through the loops of the yarn and twist in opposite directions, squeezing the water out with immense force. Then, the damp wool is hung on wooden racks to dry in the sun. The sight of the drying racks is spectacular. It is a forest of color. There are the reds of the madder, the blues of the indigo, the yellows of weld and pomegranate rind, the browns of walnut shells. The wind catches them, and they sway gently, a dancing tapestry that hasn't been woven yet. Our weaver waits. He cannot take the wool while it is wet. He sits in the shade, sipping water, watching the sun bake the color into the fiber. He chats with the dyer about the price of a lem brought from the distant mountains, about the quality of this year's madder crop. When the yarn is finally dry, it feels different. It is slightly stiffer, crunchier from the alum and the dye. It smells of the earth, nov roots and minerals and smoke. The smell of the sheep is gone, buried under the scent of human industry. He gathers his transformed cargo. The red yarn glows against his white tunic. He pays the dyer again, weighing out the silver scrap with practiced ease and steps back out into the street. The walk home feels triumphant. He is not just carrying string. He is carrying color. He is carrying the potential for beauty. As he re-enters his own courtyard, the sun is beginning its descent. The women look up from their spinning. Their eyes light up at the sight of the red wall. It is a flash of brilliance in the dusty brown world of mud brick. The weaver places the bundles carefully on a clean mat. The preparation is complete. The stage is set. Tomorrow the loom waits. With the yarn dyed and dried, returning the courtyard to its usual palette of earthy browns and dust, the time has come to build the skeleton of the fabric. The weaver stands before his loom. In the quiet of the morning, before the heat truly rises, the loom looks less like a machine and more like a musical instrument waiting for a player. It is a massive, imposing structure, leaning slightly against one of the high mud brick walls of the courtyard. This is the great vertical loom. It is a masterpiece of simple engineering. Two tall, upright posts made of strong timber-likely cedar imported from the distant mountains of Lebanon. For wood is a luxury hair support, a heavy crossbeam at the top. It frames a rectangle of empty air, a doorway to nowhere. But soon it will be filled. The process begins with the warp. These are the vertical threads, the foundation upon which the entire cloth will be built. If the weft the thread that goes across is the flesh of the fabric, the warp is the bone, and setting it up is a task of excruciating precision. If the weaver makes a mistake here, if one thread is looser than its neighbor, or if the count is off by even a single strand, the final cloth will ripple, buckle, or tear. There is no fix-it in post-production here. The warp is destiny. He begins by attaching a sturdy cord to the top beam. Then he takes the ball of red yarn, the one that smells of madder, root, and allemande, ties the end to this header cord. Now, the rhythmic work begins. He lets the ball drop toward the ground, pulling a length of thread with it, down at the bottom of the loom. There is no heavy beam to hold the threads in place. Instead, there is a solution that is both elegant and perfectly suited to the ancient world's understanding of physics. He groups a handful of warp threads together, perhaps a dozen or so, and ties them to a loom weight. These weights are curious little objects. If you were to walk through the ruins of a Mesopotamian city today, thousands of years later, you would find them scattered in the dust. They look like heavy clay donuts, or sometimes pyramids with a hole punched through the top. They are unglamorous, often roughly shaped by hand and baked in the sun. But they are the secret to the loom's tension. The weaver ties the bundle of threads to the clay weight and lets it hang. Gravity takes over. The weight pulls the threads taut, straight down toward the earth. He moves to the next bundle and the next. Slowly, a fringe of clay weights forms along the bottom of the loom, hovering just above the floor. They gently sway, clinking softly against each other with a dull, ceramic sound clack, clack, clack. It is a sound of order being imposed on chaos. This style of loomder, warp-weighted, loom is a mainstream historical fact of the region, yet it represents a significant technological choice. Historians still argue whether the transition from the horizontal ground loom, which is staked out flat on the floor, to this vertical loom was driven by a need to save space in increasingly crowded cities, or if it was a cultural import from the mountain tribes to the north. The ground loom takes up the entire footprint of a room, making it impossible to walk around. The vertical loom stands politely against the wall, allowing life in the cramped courtyard to continue. It is an urban invention for an urban life. As the weaver works across the beam, the empty space fills with a wall of red string. He is not just stringing. He is counting. He mutters numbers under his breath. The Sumerians and their successors gave us the sexagesimal system math, based on the number 60. It is why we still have 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle. The weaver counts in 60s, grouping the threads in his mind, calculating the width of the cloth based on the thickness of the yarn. It is mental arithmetic performed without a calculator, a silent chant of multiplication and division. Once the vertical threads are hanging straight and tight, vibrating like harp strings if you pluck them. The next step is the shed. This is the magic trick of weaving. To weave, you must pass the horizontal thread over one warp thread and under the next. Over, under, over, under. Doing this manually with a needle would take a lifetime. So, the weaver installs the heddle rod. This is a horizontal stick attached to the front of the loom. He uses string loops to capture every second thread, the odd-numbered threads, let's say, and ties them to this rod. When he pulls the rod forward, all those odd threads are pulled out, creating a triangular spacer shed between them and the even threads that hang straight back. He can now pass his shuttle through that space in a single motion, instantly going over and under half the threads at once. He tests the mechanism. He pulls the heddle rod. The wall of red thread splits perfectly in two. He lets it go, and the heavy clay weights pull the threads back into a flat alignment. Open, close, open, close. The mechanism works. It is a binary computer made of wood and string. 0, 1, back, front. There is a tactile satisfaction to this setup phase. The weaver runs his hand down the length of the warp. The wool is taut and rough. It hums with potential energy. He checks for crossed threads, a weaver's nightmare where two threads twist around each other, preventing the shed from opening cleanly. He finds one, grunting softly, and patiently unties the weight, untangles the line, and reties it. A quirky detail that often goes unnoticed is the personal nature of the loom weights. Archaeologists have found these clay donuts stamped with seal impressions or scratched with symbols. Some believe these marks indicated the weight of the clay, ensuring all the weights in a row were identical so the tension was even. Others suggest they might be personal property markers. This weight belongs to Enki the weaver. In a household with multiple weavers, you wouldn't want your carefully calibrated weights getting mixed up with your brother's. The sun has moved across the courtyard by the time he finishes. The loom is now dressed. It stands transformed. It is no longer a see-through frame. It is a solid wall of crimson verticals. It creates a partition in the courtyard, a screen that filters the light. The weaver steps back to admire his work. He wipes his hands on his tunic. There is a specific kind of tiredness that comes from this stage. It isn't the heavy, muscular fatigue of lifting stones, but the sharp, tense fatigue of concentration. His eyes are tired from tracking hundreds of individual strands. His fingers are sore from the friction of the twine. But the hardest part is over. The thinking, the calculating, the engineering that is done. The structure is sound. The gravity of the earth is holding his work together. What comes next is the rhythm. The loom is ready to sing, and he is ready to play it. He picks up his shuttler's smooth, boat-shaped piece of wood that has been polished by the sweat of his palms for years. He winds a bobbin of the blue indigo thread and places it inside the shuttle's hollow belly. Red warp, blue weft. He is about to create a fabric that will shimmer with the complexity of the intersection. The courtyard is quiet. The children are napping. The women are sorting grain. The weaver sits on his bench before the great wall of thread. He takes a breath, centering himself. The preparation is the prayer. The weaving is the act. He reaches out, his hand hovering near the heddle rod, poised to begin the first true motion of the cloth. The shuttle is in his hand. It is a smooth, boat-shaped piece of wood, the color of honey, polished to a high gloss by the oils of his skin and the friction of the wool. It feels heavy, solid, and reassuring. Inside its hollowed-out belly sits the bobbin of indigo blue yarn, the thread that will travel back and forth 1,000 times, 1,000 times, to bind the red warp into a single sheet of cloth. He takes a breath, holds it for a second, and then begins. His left hand reaches up and grasps the heddle rod. With a practiced pull, he brings it forward. The thousands of red threads hanging from the top beam respond instantly. The odd-numbered threads leap forward, separating from their even-numbered neighbors. A triangular tunnel of air the shed puns up between the two layers of wool. It is a clean, sharp opening, a testament to his careful setup. With his right hand, he flicks the shuttle. He doesn't just throw it. He guides it. It dives into the opening on the right side of the loom and slides effortlessly across the bottom layer of threads, riding on them like a sled on snow. It emerges on the left side, trailing a line of blue thread behind it. He catches the shuttle with his left hand. He releases the heddle rod. The heavy clay weights at the bottom of the loom clang softly as they pull the warp threads back into a flat, vertical wall, trapping the blue thread inside. Now comes the beat. He picks up the weaving sword. This is not a weapon of war, but a tool of creation. It is a long, flat slat of wood, shaped like a blade, but blunt and smooth. He inserts it into the threads and pulls it upward, hard. Thwack. He beats the new line of blue thread up against the finished edge at the top of the loom. He beats it again. Thwack. The thread is forced tight against its predecessor, locking it in place. This is the heartbeat of the loom. Pull, slide, drop. Beat, pull, slide, drop. Beat. The sound is distinctive. In the quiet courtyard, it becomes the dominant rhythm of the household. It is a percussion instrument that marks the passing of time more accurately than the sun. The clinking of the clay weights, the hiss of the shuttle sliding over the wall, and the dull, rhythmic thud of the sword beating the weft. It is a song without words, a music of industry that would be familiar to anyone who lived in the ancient world. As the blue thread intertwines with the red, a fascinating visual effect begins to emerge. The fabric does not look solidly blue, nor does it look red. It shimmers. The two colors vibrate against each other, creating a deep, purplish iridescence that changes depending on the angle of the light. This is the magic of weaving, creating a third color that doesn't exist in the pot, but only in the eye of the beholder. The work is slow, painfully slow by modern standards. In our world of high-speed industrial looms that spew out miles of denim in an hour, the pace of the ancient weaver seems almost glacial. He is building the fabric millimeter by millimeter, after an hour of constant, rhythmic motion. He might have added only a few inches to the length of the cloth. There is a mainstream historical fact that governs this entire process on a warp-weighted loom like this. The cloth is woven from the top down. As the fabric grows, it is wound onto the top beam, and the unwoven warp threads, with their heavy weights, hang lower and lower. This means the weaver is constantly working against gravity, beating the threads up rather than down. It requires a specific kind of upper body strength, a constant engagement of the shoulders and biceps. Because of this intense physicality, the weaver's body tells the story of his trade. Archaeologists studying the skeletal remains of ancient artisans can often identify a weaver just by looking at their bones. They look for specific deformities or where patterns d'osteoarthritis in the knees from standing for hours, or distinctive changes in the toe bones. Why the toes? Because, in many weaving cultures, the weaver would use their toes to help grip the bottom of the warp, or to put tension on a cord while their hands were busy with the shuttle. Our weaver, standing barefoot on the hard-packed earth, is constantly shifting his weight, his toes gripping the ground, his entire body acting as a counterbalance to the machine. He falls into a trance. This is common among those who do repetitive craft work. The conscious mind wanders away, leaving the body to perform the task it knows so perfectly. He thinks about the river, about the price of grain, about the gossip he heard at the well. His hands move independently, correcting tension, catching the shuttle, beating the thread. If a thread snaps a ping sound that every weaver dreads, he stops instantly, his hands freezing before his brain even registers the noise. He finds the broken end, ties a weaver's knotter not so small, and flat it is almost continues. Historians still argue whether the complex patterns produced in these early workshops were the result of pattern books, primitive charts or painted guides, or if the designs were entirely memorized, passed down through oral tradition like epic poems. Could a weaver hold 1,000-row geometric pattern in his head? Given that ancient cultures relied on memory far more than we do remember, they memorized entire lineages and legal codes. It is entirely possible that the software for this loom is stored safely in the weaver's mind. The sun creeps across the floor, changing the lighting on the loom. The red and blue fabric grows. It is becoming a sturdy material, thick and warm. This is not the gossamer thin linen of the Egyptians. This is Mesopotamian wool, built to withstand the desert nights. As he weaves, he hums a low, shapeless tune. It helps with the rhythm. If he speeds up, the fabric might become too tight. If he slows down, it might become too loose. The song keeps the beat steady. Thwack, slide, thwack. A fly lands on his arm, but he doesn't break his rhythm to swat it. He simply twitches a muscle, sending the intruder buzzing away. His focus is absolute. He is watching the fell of the cloth, the line where the new fabric meets the unwoven threads. It must remain perfectly straight. If it starts to smile, curve up at the sides, or frown, curve down, he knows the tension is off. He is constantly adjusting, tightening a weight here, loosening a thread there. He is an engineer of tension. The sheer monotony of the task is its own kind of meditation. There is no multitasking here. You cannot weave and check a tablet. You cannot weave and cook. You can only weave. In a world that was often chaotic, filled with the uncertainties of floods, famines, and the whims of the gods, the loom offers a small rectangle of perfect order. Here, and only here, the weaver is in complete control. He reaches the end of the blue bobbin. The shuttle feels light, empty. He stops. The sudden silence in the courtyard is heavy. He stretches his back, hearing the vertebrae pop. He wipes the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He looks at the strip of new cloth he has created. It is perhaps the width of a hand. It is perfect, tight, even, and beautiful. He reaches for a fresh bobbin, slots it into the shuttle, and the song begins again. The shuttle dives. The sword beats. The city outside may bustle and shout, but in this corner of the courtyard, time is measured only by the slow, steady accumulation of thread. The sun is directly overhead now, beating down on the flat roofs of yore with an intensity that bleaches the color from the world. The shadows in the courtyard have retreated to narrow slivers, hugging the base of the walls. The heat is a physical weight, pressing down on the city. It is too hot to work. Even the flies seem to move sluggishly. The weaver stops. He rests the shuttle on the bench and hangs the weaving sword on its peg. The silence that follows the rhythmic thwack-thwack of the morning is profound. It signals a shift in the day's energy. It is time for the midday pause. He steps away from the loom, his body stiff. He rolls his shoulders, feeling the tension release. He walks over to the shaded side of the courtyard, where the rest of the household has already gathered. A woven reed mat is spread on the ground, and upon it sits the most important part of the day. Lunch. The meal is simple, but it is the fuel that powers this entire civilization. In the center of the mat sits a large clay bowl filled with barley stew. It is thick, hearty, and flavored with onions, garlic, and perhaps a bit of mutton fat for richness. There are no individual plates. Everyone has a chunk of flatbread dents, unleavened bread baked on the hot stones of the hearth earlier that morning. The weaver tears off a piece of bread and uses it as a scoop. This is the universal cutlery of the ancient world. The bread is the spoon, the napkin, and the food all in one. He dips it into the stew, catching a piece of onion. The taste is savory and comforting, but the most vital part of the meal stands in a large jar to the side. It is beer now. We must pause to adjust our modern understanding of beer. This is not the clear, carbonated, amber liquid you find in a glass bottle today. Mesopotamian beer kaz is a different beast entirely. It is thick, opaque, and highly nutritious. It is made from fermented barley bread, and it still contains a fair amount of the grain husks and sediment floating in it. It is less of a recreational beverage and more of a liquid lunch. It is rich in calories, vitamins, and just enough alcohol to kill the bacteria in the water without getting you drunk. Unless you drink a lot of it, because of the solids floating in it. You cannot simply sip it from a cup, you would get a mouthful of soggy chaff. So, they use straws. The weaver reaches for a long reed tube. He dips it into the jar, piercing the layer of solids on top to reach the liquid below. He takes a long pull. It is sour, yeasty, and incredibly refreshing. The wealthy might use straws made of gold or silver, bent at a right angle for easier sipping. But here, a simple river reed does the job just as well. The image of people sitting around a large jar, sipping beer through long straws, is one of the most common scenes depicted on cylinder seals from this era. It is the ancient equivalent of the office water cooler, communal moment of relaxation. As they eat, the family talks. The conversation is slow and drowsy, matched to the heat of the day. They talk about the loom. The weaver mentions that the red wool is taking the tension well, better than the last batch. His wife mentions that the neighbors are having trouble with their goat. It keeps trying to eat the thatch on their roof. There is a mainstream historical fact that underscores this simple meal. The Mesopotamian diet was incredibly healthy. They ate very little meat, reserving it for festivals. Their daily intake was dominated by grains, legumes like lentils and chickpeas, vegetables like onions, garlic, leeks, and cucumbers, and fruits like dates, figs, and pomegranates. It was a diet that sustained a population capable of building ziggurats and digging hundreds of miles of canals. A quirky detail about their culinary life is the omnipresence of garlic. They loved it. They used it in everything. Tablets from the royal palace kitchens list garlic delivery by the cartload. The breath of an ancient Sumerian city would have been potent. But since everyone ate it, no one noticed. It was just the smell of home, as the weaver chews on a dried date sticky. Sweet and tasting of sunshine, he listens to his son. The boy is young, perhaps 7 or 8, and he is recounting a story he heard from the other boys in the street. It is a ghost story about a giddim, a spirit of the dead that wasn't buried properly and now haunts the alleyways looking for food. The weaver nods, taking another sip of beer. He reminds the boy that this is why they pour a libation of water for the ancestors every new moon, to keep the dead fed and happy, so they don't come bothering the living. It is a practical, transactional relationship with the supernatural. You do your part, the ghosts stay in the netherworld, and everyone gets a good night's sleep. Historians still argue whether the common people of Mesopotamia truly believed the king was a divine being, literally a god on earth, or if they viewed him more as a distant, powerful landlord who needed to be appeased with taxes. Did the weaver really care about the high politics of the palace? Probably not. His world is smaller. It is defined by the 4 walls of this courtyard, the price of wool, and the quality of his beer. The meal winds down. The stew bowl is wiped clean with the last pieces of bread. The beer jar is lighter. A heaviness settles over the group. This is the siesta hour. In a climate where the afternoon temperature can easily hit 45 degrees Celsius, that's over 110 Fahrenheit, working through the midday is not just difficult, It is dangerous. The weaver leans back against the wall, stretching his legs out. He closes his eyes. The sounds of the city have dulled. Even the donkeys are quiet. The only sound is the buzzing of a fly and the gentle rhythmic breathing of his family. He doesn't sleep, deeply just a light doze, a hovering between wakefulness and dreams. In this state, his mind still drifts to the loom. He traces the pattern of the border in his head. He solves a problem with a sticky warp thread that has been bothering him. Even in rest, he is a weaver. This pause is essential. It divides the day into two distinct acts. The morning was for heavy labor, for breaking the back of the work. The afternoon, which will come after the worst of the heat breaks, will be for finesse. For the intricate details, he feels a small hand on his ankle. It is his daughter, curling up for her nap. He shifts slightly to give her more room on the mat. This intimacy, this piling together of bodies in the shade, is the core of their resilience. They face the heat together. For now, the shuttle is still. The red and blue cloth hangs motionless on the loom. The beer has done its work, softening the edges of the world. The weaver lets out a long, slow breath. The second half of the day can wait. For now, there is only the shade, the full belly, and the quiet. The afternoon air is still heavy, but the fierce, blinding white of noon has softened into a golden haze. The weaver rises from the mat, splashing a little more water on his face from the courtyard jar. The nap has cleared the fog of the beer and the heat. He feels sharp again, and he needs to be. The mindless rhythm of the morning, the simple back and forth of the blue field is over. Now comes the tricky part. Now he begins the border. He sits back down at the loom, but this time he leans in closer. He is no longer using the long boat shuttle that glides across the entire width of the cloth. Instead, he reaches for a basket of smaller bobbins, little wooden spools no bigger than a finger, wound with bright, contrasting colors. There is mustard yellow, dyed from weld, a deep brownish black from natural wool, and a vibrant green, a rare shade achieved by dyeing. The wool yellow first, and then dipping it quickly into the indigo. The border is not just a decoration. In the ancient mind, the edge of a thing is dangerous. It is where the object ends and the rest of the world begins. It is a point of vulnerability, just as the city has walls to protect it from the wild desert. A garment needs a fortified border to protect the wearer from spiritual harm. The weaver is not just making the cloth pretty. He is building a spiritual fortress. He begins to count. This is no longer the binary 0 to 1 of the plane we've. This is complex geometry. He picks up a few warp threads with his fingers, skipping others. He passes the yellow thread through a small section, then drops it and picks up the black. He is building a pattern of interlocking triangles, row by painstaking row in the art of Mesopotamia. These triangles are often called mountain scales. They represent the sacred mountains to the east, the place where the sun rises, the home of the gods. By weaving them into the hem, he is grounding the wearer, connecting them to the divine geography of the world. His fingers move with a spider-like dexterity. He twists the threads around each other at the joins so there are no holes in the fabric. This technique, which we might call tapestry weave today, allows him to paint with yarn. The triangles rise, sharp and jagged. A miniature mountain range growing along the bottom of the robe. There is a mainstream historical fact that elevates the importance of this work. In Mesopotamian society, the hem of a person's garment was their identity. It was legally significant. If a man needed to sign a clay tablet but didn't have his stone cylinder seal with him, he would press the hem of his garment into the wet clay. The unique pattern of the weave and the fringe left a distinctive mark that served as a signature. To cut off the hem of a wife's robe was the legal act of divorce. To hand over a piece of your hem was to offer a guarantee. The weaver knows this. He knows he is weaving the man's legal standing, his public face, right into the wool dot above the mountains. He begins a new motif. He switches to the red yarn. He creates a row of small 8-pointed rosettes. This is the symbol of Inanna, or Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, the morning and evening star. She is a volatile, powerful deity, and wearing her symbol is a way of asking for her favor, or perhaps just asking her to aim her temper elsewhere. He works in silence now. The rhythmic clatter of the loom is gone, replaced by the soft pluck-pluck of his fingers picking at the strings. It is slow work. An hour might pass, and he has only added a finger width of decoration. But the value of the cloth is increasing exponentially with every row as he navigates the corners of the pattern. He weaves in a quirky, almost invisible detail. Amidst the perfect geometry, he intentionally twists a thread the wrong way or adds a tiny, barely exciting knot. This is the apotropaic era. There is a belief, whispered in the workshops, that creating something absolutely perfect is an act of hubris, a challenge to the gods. Only the gods can be perfect. To make a flawless cloth is to invite the evil eye, the jealous glare of the spirits who envy human skill. So, he weaves in a tiny flaw, a little humility trap to catch the jealousy of the spirits and let it dissipate harmlessly. It is a safety valve made of wool. The sun dips lower, casting long, sharp shadows across the warp strings. The pattern seems to vibrate in the changing light. The yellow triangles glow against the deep blue. Background: historians still argue about the extent to which these patterns constituted a readable language. Did a specific arrangement of rosettes and triangles identify a person as belonging to a specific clan or profession, much like the tartans of Scotland? Some scholars believe the patterns were strictly regulated by the palace, badges of rank that you could be punished for wearing if you weren't entitled to them. Others argue it was simply a matter of fashion and budgetive. You could afford the weaver's time, you could have the rosettes. Watching our weaver work, making small, intuitive choices about the spacing of the stars. It feels less like a rigid code and more like an artistic dialogue. He finishes the rosette border and adds a final band of protection. The eye, it is a simple diamond shape with a dot in the center. It represents the eye of the god, always watching, always open. By placing it on the hem, the wearer is protected even from the ground up. Evil spirits, which were thought to slither like snakes or rise from the netherworld, would see the eye on the hem and recoil. The weaver rubs his eyes. The close work is straining. He has been staring at the grid of threads for hours, translating the image in his mind onto the loom. He picks up the beater sword and gives the border a gentle tap knot, the hard thwack of the morning, but a firm press to pack the colored threads tightly together, so they cover the warp completely. He runs his thumb over the raised texture of the embroidery-like weave. It is thick and stiff. It feels substantial. This border will drag in the dust of the city streets. It will be stepped on. It will be brushed against walls. It needs to be the strongest part of the garment. He ties off the threads at the back, leaving small tufts of color hanging loose on the reverse side. The back of the cloth looks like a chaotic map of his thought process. a mess of knots and jumps, but the front is a pristine facade of order. It is a perfect metaphor for the city itself, outwardly rigid and ordered. Inwardly, a complex tangle of human connections. The difficult work is done. The border is complete. He leans back, cracking his knuckles. The cloth now has a soul. It has a name woven into its edge, even if that name is made of shapes rather than letters. He takes a sip of water, the coolness welcome in his dry throat. The day is winding down, but there is one more task to attend to before the light fails completely. The bureaucratic reality of the city is calling. The sun has begun its slow slide down the western sky, lengthening the shadows once again and painting the whitewashed walls with a brush of soft amber. The weaver leaves his loom. The complex work of the border is finished, but the business of the day is not quite done. He needs a record. In a city as complex as your memory is not enough. Deals must be solidified in earth. He washes the blue dye from his fingers, though a faint azure stain remains in the creases of his knuckles, the badge of his trade. He adjusts his tunic and steps out of the courtyard, heading toward the administrative heart of the district. He is going to the Edabar, the house of tablets, or, more specifically, to the stall of a public scribe who sits in its shadow. The walk takes him away from the noise of the workshops and the smell of the dye vats. The streets here are slightly wider, lined with buildings that feel heavier, more permanent. This is the domain of the bureaucrats, the priests, and the record keepers. The air here feels drier, smelling of dust and dried reed rather than steam and wool. He finds the scribe sitting on a low bench under a woven awning. The man is surrounded by the tools of his trade, a jar of water, a basket of fresh, damp clay, and a set of reed sticks. He looks up as the weaver approaches. There is a calmness to the scribe, a stillness that contrasts with the physical energy of the weaver. His hands are soft, uncalloused, but stained with the grey mud of the river. The weaver explains what he needs. It is a receipt, a formal acknowledgement of the wool he'd purchased from the temple flocks earlier, and a record of the commission for the garment he is currently weaving. It is a debt note, essentially. I, the weaver, owe one finished robe of first-quality wool to the merchant, to be delivered by the new moon. The scribe nods. He reaches into his basket and pulls out a handful of clay. It is fine-grained, purified of any grit or pebbles. He rolls it in his hands, patting it into a smooth, pillow-shaped rectangle about the size of a bar of soap. It is wet and cool, glistening with moisture. Then he picks up his stylus. It is a simple reed, cut from the riverbank, but the end has been sliced into a specific triangular shape. This is the technology that defines an era. The scribe begins to write. He doesn't drag the tool across the clay like a pen on paper. He presses, press, lift, press, lift. Each motion leaves a crisp, wedge-shaped impression. This is cuneiform, literally wedge-shaped writing. The sound is incredibly satisfying. It is a soft, wet squish followed by a tiny suction pop as the reed pulls away. TCHK, TCHK, TCHK. It is the sound of history being recorded. The scribe works quickly. He turns the tablet in his hand, writing in columns. He records the amount of wool measured by weight, the type of garment, a robe with a mountain pattern border, and the names of the parties involved. Here is a mainstream historical fact that puts this moment in perspective. We have more receipts, ledgers, and shopping lists from ancient Mesopotamia than we have myths or poems. These people were obsessed with documentation. Every sheep, every bushel of barley, Every jar of beer was counted and recorded. The bureaucracy of yore was a machine that ran on clay. The weaver watches the wedges form. He cannot read the complex signs, or can he? This is a point of open debate among scholars. Historians still argue about the extent of literacy in this period. Was reading the exclusive magic of the scribal class? Or did artisans like our weaver know enough functional literacy to recognize the symbol for wool, silver, and their own name? It is likely the latter. He watches the stylus make the sign for robe, a specific arrangement of wedges and nods. He knows that shape. It matches the shape of the work in his mind. Once the text is written, the scribe does something delightful. He hands the wet tablet to the weaver. The weaver reaches for a small stone cylinder hanging on a cord around his neck. This is his cylinder seal. It is his ID card, carved from lapis lazuli. He rolls the cylinder across the bottom of the wet clay. It leaves a continuous, raised picture, a tiny scene of a man presenting a gift to a seated god. This is his signature. The deal is sealed, but the scribe is not finished. He takes a fresh lump of clay and rolls it out flat, like a pie crust. He takes the receipt he just wrote, which is still damp, and wraps the new sheet of clay around it, completely enclosing it. He smooths it out until it looks like a round clay ball. This is a case tablet or a clay envelope. It is a brilliant security measure. He writes the summary of the transaction on the outside of this envelope and has the weaver roll his seal again. Why do this? If the merchant later tries to cheat the weaver and change the numbers on the outside, say, changing one robe to 2 robes, the weaver can demand they break the envelope. Inside, the original tablet, protected from the air and from tampering, will reveal the truth. It is tamper-evident packaging. Invented 4,000 years before plastic, there is a quirky, almost comical reality to this system. The files of a businessman in yore were incredibly heavy. If you had a lot of receipts, you didn't just need a folder. You needed a strong shelf and a sturdy back. A dispute over a contract could involve hauling 50 pounds of baked earth to the judge. The scribe places the clay envelope on a shelf to dry in the shade. It won't be baked in a kilt that is reserved for permanent library records. Sun-dried clay is hard enough to last for years, but if you ever want to recycle it, you just soak it in a bucket of water and it turns back into mud, ready for a new contract. It is the ultimate sustainable office supply. The transaction is done. The scribe wipes his reed on a cloth. The weaver pays him with a small measure of grain poured from a pouch into the scribe's bowl. Currency is often fluid here. A service can be bought with barley as easily as silver. As the weaver walks away, he feels a sense of security. The clay remembers. In a world where life can be fragile, where floods can sweep away houses and sickness can take a life in days, there is a deep comfort in the permanence of the record. The words pressed into that clay will last longer than the wool he weaves, longer than the wood of his loom, perhaps even longer than the walls of the city. He walks back through the dusty streets. The light is turning golden red now. The workday is officially ending. The administrative spell is broken, and his mind returns to the physical world, to the feel of the shuttle and the smell of dinner cooking. But for a moment, he has touched the intellectual nerve center of his civilization. He has participated in the great Mesopotamian project of creating order out of the chaotic natural world. One wedge at a time. He reaches his door. The clay dust of the scribe's quarter is on his sandals. He stamps it off before entering. The tablet will dry on the scribe's shelf, hardening into a stone testimony of his labor. Tonight, he can sleep knowing that his work is accounted for. The books are balanced. The weaver leaves the quiet, dusty order of the scribal quarter and turns toward the river. As he walks, the air changes again. The dry, scholarly silence is replaced by a low, vibrating hum. At first, it sounds like a swarm of bees, distant and indistinct. But as he rounds a corner, the sound separates into 1,000 distinct noises. The braying of donkeys, the clucking of hens, the rhythmic hammering of coppersmiths, and above all, the shouting of human voices. He has arrived at the bazaar. This is the great marketplace of yore. It is the beating heart of the city, the place where the wealth of the world flows in and out. The weaver clutches the bolt of finished clother, heavy, cream-colored woolen fabric he finished last week tightly against his chest. Here, in this labyrinth of stalls and shaded alleyways, his work will be transformed into silver, into oil, into life. The market is a sensory overload, but if you let yourself float through it, it has a rhythm all its own. The streets here are covered with woven reed mats stretched between the buildings, creating a dappled, filtered light. It feels like walking underwater. Dust motes dance in the shafts of sunlight that pierce the gaps in the awning, illuminating the merchandise in sudden, theatrical spotlights. To his left, a potter is arranging stacks of bowls, the clay still smelling of the kiln. To his right, a basket weaver sits amidst a pile of river reeds, his fingers moving so fast they blur. But the weaver is not looking for local goods. He is making his way toward the section reserved for the Damgardha traveling merchants. This is where the true scale of the ancient world reveals itself. We often think of the past as isolated, with people living and dying in the same village, never seeing anything beyond the horizon. But here, in the bazaar of yore, the horizon has come to visit. There are men here with dark skin and strange, melodious accents. They are traders from Meluhha, what we now know as the Indus Valley civilization in Pakistan. They have traveled thousands of kilometers by sea to be here. They sell beads made of carnelian, a stone the color of a setting sun, etched with white patterns that the local craftsman cannot replicate. They bring exotic animals, sometimes even monkeys, which sit on their shoulders, watching the crowd with intelligent, blinking eyes. There are men from Megan Modern Oman, smelling of copper and sea salt. They offload heavy ingots of metal, the raw material that will become the tools and weapons of Sumer. And there are traders from the north, from the cedar forests, bringing wood that scents the air with a sharp, resinous perfume. The weaver stops at the stall of a merchant he knows. This man deals in textiles, aggregating the output of dozens of household weavers to sell to the export market. The negotiation begins. It is a slow, polite dance. There is no sticker price here. Every transaction is a conversation. The merchant examines the cloth. He unfolds it, checking the selvage, the finished edge. He holds it up to the light to look for knots or uneven spinning. He grunts, pointing out a small irregularity near the corner. The weaver counters, pointing out the tightness of the weave and the brightness of the wool. They haggle. But it is not an argument. It is a ritual. They discuss the price of barley, the difficulty of finding good spinners, the heat of the summer. Finally, a price is agreed upon. The merchant reaches for his scales. The weaver brings out his own weights, small polished stones shaped like ducks, with their heads turned back to rest on their wings. They place the silver coils and rings into the pans until they balance. It is a moment of pure trust, verified by gravity. Historians still argue whether these markets were truly free markets in the modern sense, driven by supply and demand, or if they were heavily regulated extensions of the palace and temple bureaucracy. Were these merchants independent entrepreneurs, or were they state agents fulfilling quotas? As the weaver watches the silver settle in the scale, it feels like a bit of both. The state may set the standards, but the haggling, that is purely human. With silver in his pouch, the weaver moves deeper into the market. He is now a customer. He stops at a stall selling oils and perfumes. The air here is thick and sweet. There are jars of sesame oil for cooking, but also tiny alabaster pots of perfumed oilcedar, cypress, and myrtle. He buys a small jar of sesame oil, the staple fat of the Mesopotamian kitchen. As he waits for the oil to be poured, he overhears a heated conversation at the next stall. A man is complaining loudly about a shipment of copper. He is waving a clay tablet in the era formal letter of complaint. This is a nod to a delightful, quirky reality of this era. Archaeologists have found a tablet from this exact time and place, written to a merchant named Anasar. It is perhaps the oldest customer service complaint in history. The writer, a man named Nani, is furious. He writes, "When you came, you said to me, 'I will give Gimmelsin when he comes. Fine quality copper ingots. You left then, but you did not do what you promised me. What do you take me for, that you treat somebody like me with such contempt?'" The weaver smiles to himself. It seems Aonosor is at it again. The copper merchant is notorious in the bazaar for selling substandard ingots and being rude to the messengers. It is a small, human drama playing out in the midst of empire. Some things, it seems, never change. Bad service is timeless. He wanders further. He passes a stall selling bitumen, the black sticky tar used for waterproofing. He passes a jeweler working with lapis lazuli, the blue stone with gold flecks that looks like the night sky. This stone comes from the mountains of Afghanistan, passed from hand to hand across the continent until it ends up here, in a dusty stall in southern Iraq, destined to become a cylinder seal or a necklace for a high priestess. The crowd is dense. He has to turn his shoulders to squeeze past a donkey laden with baskets of dates. The smell of the crowd is intense sweat, garlic, wool, and dust. But there is also the smell of roasting meat. Street food vendors are fanning small charcoal grills, cooking skewers of mutton or goat. The smoke drifts through the awning, making his stomach rumble. He sees things he can never afford. A beautifully carved ivory comb from the east. A bronze mirror that reflects his face, not as a shadow, but as a shining image. A cloak of linen so fine it looks like woven air. He does not envy these things. He simply admires them. They are proof of human skill, and as a craftsman, he respects the hands that made them. The noise is exhausting. It is a constant assault of information. Fresh fish from the marsh, dates, sweet dates. Make way, make way. It is the sound of a city that is alive, a city that is hungry and productive. Yor is a sponge, soaking up resources from the mountains and the sea, and squeezing out order and civilization. But the weaver is tired. The thrill of the sale is fading, replaced by the desire for the quiet of his courtyard. He clutches his jar of oil and his pouch of silver. He has done his part. He has fed the great machine of the market. He begins to navigate his way out. The crowd seems to be thinning slightly as the afternoon wears on. The intense energy of the morning trade is settling into a lower, slower gear. The merchants are counting their takings. The donkeys are looking droop-eared and bored. He steps out from under the reed, awning, and back into the full glare of the street. The silence of the residential quarter hits him like a physical wave. The roar of the bazaar is cut off by the thick mud brick walls. It is sudden and jarring. One moment, he was in the center of the world. The next, he is just a man walking home on a dirt road. He takes a deep breath, clearing the scents of copper and exotic spices from his nose. The market is a wonder, a testament to human connection. But it is loud. And tonight, he prefers the company of his loom and the quiet murmur of the river. The walk home is lighter now. The heavy bolt of cloth is gone, replaced by the lightness of a finished task. The dust of the marketplace has barely settled on the weaver's sandals when a knock comes at the heavy wooden door of his courtyard. It is not the casual, rhythmic rap of a neighbor, nor the impatient pounding of a debt collector. It is a precise, authoritative strike. He opens the door to find a man dressed in pristine white. The visitor is clean-shaven head and face completely smooth, which immediately marks him as a member of the priesthood. He carries a scent of cedar, incense, and authority. He does not step inside. The domestic chaos of a weaver's home is perhaps too worldly for him. Instead, he hands over a small, sealed jar and a set of instructions spoken in a low, chant-like cadence. The commission has come from the great ziggurat itself. This is the highest honor a craftsman in your can receive, and also the most terrifying. He is not being asked to weave for a merchant or a noble, or even the king. He is being asked to weave for the goddess. Specifically, for the golden statue of Ningal, the great lady, the wife of the moon god, Nana. The jar contains the material. The weaver carries it to his cleanest mat and opens it with trembling fingers. Inside, there is no wool. There is no smell of sheep, no lanolin, no grease. Instead, he finds spools of thread so fine they look like spun spiderwebs. This is linen to the ancient Mesopotamians. Wool was the fabric of the earthworm, practical, but ultimately animal. It came from a living, sweating beast. But linen was the fabric of the pure. It came from the flax plant, grown in the well-watered fields along the river. It was vegetable, cool to the touch, and it did not harbor lice or absorb sweat the way wool did. It was the only material fit to touch the skin of the divine. The weaver sets up a smaller loom for this task. He cannot use the great vertical loom that leans against the courtyard wall. It is too coarse, too brutal for this work. He brings out a horizontal ground loom, staking it out in the coolest, dampest corner of the house. This is a critical technical detail. Flax is brittle when dry. If he tries to weave this thread in the heat of the afternoon sun, it will snap. He needs timidity. He sprinkles water on the dirt floor around the loom to raise the moisture in the air. He keeps a bowl of water nearby to dip his fingers, keeping the thread supple as he begins to warp the loom with the ghostly white thread. His mind turns to the entity he is clothing. In our modern world, we tend to think of statues as symbol stone or metal representations of an idea. But in Yor, the statue is the goddess. Once the mouth-opening ritual, the Miss P, has been performed, the spirit of the deity enters the object. The statue eats, sleeps, hears, and smells. And, crucially for our story, she needs to be dressed. This leads us to a mainstream historical fact that dominates the temple economy. The clothing of the gods was a massive, never-ending cycle. The statues were not just carved and left alone. They had wardrobes that would rival a modern fashion icon. They had summer clothes, winter clothes, festival robes, and sleeping gowns. They were changed daily by the priests in the inner sanctum, behind heavy curtains where no commoner was allowed to look. The weaver works with a slow, held breath, intensity. He is weaving a garment of light. The linen is so fine that when it is finished, it will be semi-transparent. It is a plain weave, no complex mountains or rosettes here. The purity of the fiber is the point. It must be white, blindingly white. There is a quirky, slightly surreal aspect to this divine wardrobe, since the statues couldn't actually move to put on their clothes. The garments were designed with practical cheats. They often had open backs or ties that made them like hospital gowns, easy to slip onto a rigid, seated figure. The weaver has to leave a slit in the back of the tunic, a secret tailoring trick to accommodate the goddess's immobility. As he throws the shuttle, lighter and smaller than his wool shuttle, he imagines the moment of the dressing. The priests, chanting softly, bathing the gold and lapis lazuli body of the goddess with scented water, and then draping this very cloth over her shoulders. It is an intimate act. He is touching the goddess by proxy. Historians still argue about what happened to these holy garments after the god had worn them. Some texts suggest they were stored in vast treasuries until they disintegrated, but others hint at a sacred recycling system, where the king would be granted the honor of wearing the god's cast-offs during high festivals, absorbing the residual divine power that clung to the fabric. It brings up a fascinating question. Did the king wear the clothes to honor the god, or to secretly equate himself with the divine? The work is quiet. There is no thwack of the beater here, only a gentle tap. The linen does not stretch like wool. It has no give. The tension must be perfect, or the fabric will buckle. It requires a different kind of hand, not the strong grip of the wool weaver, but the sensitive touch of a harpist. He weaves a fringe at the bottom. This is not for style, but for spiritual function. In Mesopotamian thought, the fringe was a conduit. It was the part of the garment that could be extended to touch the earth, grounding the power of the wearer. For a goddess, the fringe was where her power flowed out into the world. If a petitioner was lucky enough to touch the hem of her garment, this is what they were reaching for. Hours pass. The world outside the house disappears. There is only the white thread and the damp earth. The weaver's back aches, but he dares not stop. To leave a start mark or a line of uneven tension on the goddess's robe would be a sacrilege. He thinks about the nature of Nina. She is the mother, the compassionate one. She pleaded for the city of Ur not to be destroyed in the great laments of the past. She is the one who interprets dreams. He whispers a silent prayer as he works, asking for the health of his son, for the safety of his home. It feels appropriate to weave a prayer into the cloth. Finally, the piece is done. It lies on the loom like a pool of milk. It is terrifyingly beautiful. He cuts it from the warp, leaving long, elegant tassels. He does not wash, it is already pure. He folds it carefully, placing it into a basket lined with clean reeds. He does not take this delivery to the scribe or the market. He must carry it himself to the temple gate. The walk to the ziggurat is different from his other journeys. He walks with his head down, clutching the basket. He passes through the great temenos wall, the sacred boundary that separates the holy precinct from the mundane city. The noise of the city falls away here. The air smells of roasting meats, sacrifices being burned on the great altars, and sweet incense. He hands the basket to a priest at the gate. There is no haggling, no weighing of silver. The reward for this work is a ration of temple grain, yes, but mostly it is the favor of the temple. To be known as a weaver of the god is a protection that no money can buy. As he turns to leave, he glances up at the massive structure of the ziggurat, rising step by step toward the heavens. Somewhere up there, in the blue-tiled sanctuary at the summit, the Lady Ningle is waiting, and tonight she will wear the work of his hands. He walks home feeling strangely light. He has engaged with the highest power in his universe. He has clothed the divine. It is a feeling of immense, quiet satisfaction. But as he enters his courtyard, seeing his wife spinning the rough, greasy wool of the sheep once more, he is relieved to be back in the world of men. The air of the gods is too thin, too pure for daily life. It is good to be back among the dust and the noise. The cloth has left the weaver's hands. It has been washed, dyed, woven, and recorded. Now it must begin its own journey, one that will take it far beyond the mud-brick walls of the courtyard, beyond the city gates, and even beyond the familiar horizon of the plains. To follow it, we must walk down to the water's edge, to the place where the solid earth surrenders to the fluid power of the Euphrates. We arrive at the Karam, the great key of your dot, if the ziggurat is the spiritual anchor of the city. Reaching up to the sky, the Karam is its lifeline. Reaching out to the world, it is a place of perpetual motion. The air here is cooler, tempered by the breeze coming off the water, but it is heavy with moisture and the complex, organic smell of the river, a mix of wet clay, drying fish, and the ever-present, sharp temps of bitumen. The river is wide here, a sluggish, brown mussel flexing its way toward the sea, and bobbing on its surface is a fleet of vessels that look like nothing in our modern world. These are the Marga boats. They are shaped like crescent moons, curved elegantly at the prow and stern, constructed entirely from bundles of river reeds bound tightly together. They look fragile, almost like basketry floating on the water. But do not let their appearance fool you. These are masterpieces of engineering. The reeds are coated in thick layers of black bitumen, making them waterproof and surprisingly tough. They sit high in the water, buoyant and flexible, capable of riding the currents without cracking. Our weaver stands on the bank, watching a team of porters load his bales of red and blue cloth onto one of these curved ships. The porters move with a rhythmic grace, balancing the heavy loads on their shoulders as they walk across the gangplanks made of palm logs. The boat dips slightly with each new addition, a gentle nod of acknowledgement to the weight of the city's industry. This moment of loading highlights a mainstream historical fact that shaped the entire ancient world. Wool was the oil of the Bronze Age. Mesopotamia had very few natural resources, no metal, no stone, no good timber. All they had was mud, water, and grass. But they turned that grass into sheep, the sheep into wool, and the wool into cloth. This textile industry was the engine that bought the copper for their weapons, the lapis lazuli for their jewelry, and the cedar for their temples. The bale of cloth sitting on that deck is not just a blanket. It is currency. The boatman is a figure cut from a different cloth than the city dwellers. He is shirtless, his skin leathery from the sun and the reflection of the water. He shouts commands in a dialect that is peppered with foreign words, the slang of the trade routes. He knows the river not as a map, but as a living thing. He knows where the sandbars shift, where the crocodiles sun themselves, and where the current runs fast enough to carry him to the sea dot. As the cargo is secured, we notice a quirky detail about the boat's maintenance. A young boy is walking along the hull, inspecting the black coating. In his hand, he holds a lump of raw bitumen. Occasionally, he spots a crack or a weak spot, and he presses the sticky black substance into it, smoothing it with his thumb. It's like caulking a bathtub, but with prehistoric tar. But here's the strange part. If you look closely, you might see him pop a small piece of the clean, hardened bitumen into his mouth and chew it like gum. It was a common habit among the river folk, a natural, antiseptic chewing gum that probably did wonders for their teeth, even if it tasted like a newly paved road. The boat is destined for Dilmun. Dilmun, what we now know as the island of Bahrain, was the great emporium of the Gulf. It was a legendary land of sweet water and eternal youth in Sumerian mythology, but in reality, it was the Wall Street of the ancient Middle East. There, the wool from yore would be traded for copper ingots from Megan Oman or carnelian beads from the distant Indus. Valley historians still argue vigorously about the geography of this specific scene. Today, the ruins of yore lie far inland, stranded in the desert miles from the coast. But in 2000 BCE, the waters of the Persian Gulf came much further north. Some scholars believe Yore was a true coastal city with seagoing ships docking right at its walls. Others argue it was slightly inland, connected to the sea by a massive canal or the tidal reach of the river. Was our weaver looking at a riverboat that would transfer cargo to a sea ship later, or was he looking at a vessel that would brave the open ocean? The debate continues, shifting with every geological survey of the sediment layers. The mooring ropes are cast off. The boatman uses a long punting pole to push the vessel away from the quay. The current catches the curved hull. The boat drifts out, spinning slowly until the rudder oars bite into the water and straighten it out. The weaver watches it go. There is a specific melancholy to this moment. He has spent weeks laboring over that cloth. He knows every thread, every knot, every intentional mistake woven into the border. He knows the smell of the dye and the tension of the warp. And now it is drifting away, destined to be worn by a stranger who will never know his name. Perhaps a merchant in a land where they speak a language he cannot understand. But there is pride, too. His work is good enough to travel. It is good enough to be exchanged for the treasures of the world. As the boat becomes a silhouette against the shimmering water, the weaver turns his attention to the other traffic on the river. It is not just big trade ships. The water is alive with guffers, the circular coracles that look like giant floating baskets. They spin dizzily as paddlers try to steer them across the current. They are ferrying people, livestock, and bricks from one side of the bank to the other. One guffer is carrying a donkey. The animal stands calmly in the center of the round boat, looking completely unimpressed by the miracle of buoyancy, while its owner paddles furiously. It is a reminder that the river is the highway, the subway, and the bridge of the ancient world. If you want to move anything heavier than a backpack, you put it on the water. The sun reflects off the ripples, creating a dazzling hypnotic pattern of light. The sound of the water lap, lap, lap against the mud bank is the most soothing sound in the city. It is the sound of continuity. Kings rise and fall, walls are built and crumble, but the river keeps flowing. It brings the flood that destroys and the silt that creates. It is the beginning and the end of the story of yore. The weaver stands there for a long moment, breathing in the cooler air. The humidity settles on his skin. He watches until the curved boat is just a speck, disappearing around a bend in the river, carried by the brown waters toward the rising sun. The transaction is complete. The cycle of his labor has physically left the city. He turns back toward the gate. The sun is beginning to set in earnest now, casting long shadows that stretch from the ziggurat across the plain. The workday is truly over. The noise of the harbor fades behind him as he re-enters the maze of streets. He is empty-handed now, but his mind is already turning to the next fleece, the next dye bath, the next pattern. But first, there is the evening to enjoy. The city is preparing for the night, and the comforts of home are calling. The weaver walks back from the harbor, the weight of the city walls casting a long, cooling shadow over him. The intense, blinding glare of the day has finally surrendered. The sun is dipping low on the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of bruised purple and burnt orange. It is that golden hour when the mud brick buildings, usually so stark and dusty, glow with an inner warmth. He pushes open the door to his courtyard. The air inside is different now. The frantic energy of the morning, the spinning, the cooking, the shouting has evaporated. The space feels reclaimed by a gentle stillness. The loom stands in the corner, a silent sentinel. The red and blue cloth he worked on earlier hangs motionless, the colors deepening in the twilight. It is time to put the workshop to bed. He approaches the loom with a sense of reverence. A craftsman is only as good as his tools, and in a world where metal is expensive and good wood is rare, these objects are more than just equipment. They are heirlooms. He picks up his boat. It is warm from the day's friction. He takes a small rag soaked in the sesame oil he bought at the market and gently wipes down the wood. The oil feeds the grain, keeping it smooth so it won't snag the delicate woolen fibers. He treats it with the care a soldier might give a sword. He checks the heddle rod and the weights. He runs a hand down the warp threads one last time, not to work, but to say good night. There is a superstition here, a quirky whisper among the guild of weavers. You must never leave a loom open and uncovered at night. They say that if you do, the mischievous spirits of the air the Lyle might come while you sleep and weave tangles into your work. Or worse, weave their own chaotic spells into the cloth. So, he takes a large sheet of rough linen and drapes it over the loom. It looks like a shroud, protecting the unfinished creation from the dust and the ghosts. He sits on his low stool and looks at his hands. They are stained with blue, indigo, and red madder, the map of his day's labor written on his skin. He reaches for a small bowl of fine clay mixed with ash and oil, the ancient equivalent of heavy-duty hand soap. He scrubs his fingers. The grit exfoliates the skin, removing the worst of the dye, though his nails will likely remain blue forever. It is a badge of honor. It shows he is a man who makes things. While he cleans, his wife moves through the courtyard, lighting the oil lamps. They are simple clay bowls with a pinched rim to hold the wick. As the flame catches, it casts a soft, flickering light that makes the shadows dance. The smell of burning oil joins the scent of cooling earth. There is a mainstream historical fact that defines the rhythm of this weaver's life. The concept of the weekend, as we know it, did not exist. There was no Saturday or Sunday where the entire city shut down for leisure. However, the Mesopotamian calendar was dotted with feast days, festivals, and unlucky days when work was forbidden. The lunar cycle dictated the rest. The new moon, the full moon, these were the pauses. But on a regular day like today, the work only stops when the light fails. The sun is the foreman, and when the foreman leaves, the workers can finally rest. He feels the fatigue in his shoulders, a dull ache between the shoulder blades from hunching over the loom. He stretches, hearing the satisfying pop of his joints. It is a good kind of tired. It is the exhaustion of completion. He looks at the stack of finished yarn balls, the covered loom, the clean tools. He has wrested order from the chaos of the raw fleece. He has added his line to the story of the city. Historians still argue about the social status of a master weaver like him. Was he considered a lowly laborer, just a step above a peasant? Or was he a respected artisan, a member of a powerful guild with political sway? The texts are ambiguous. We see lists of rations where weavers get the same as everyone else, but we also see royal letters treating master craftsmen with great deference. Sitting here in his own courtyard, surrounded by the fruits of his skill, he certainly doesn't feel lowly. He feels like the master of his domain. The sounds of the city are changing. The heavy industrial noises, the hammering, the sawing, the shouting of drovers have faded. In their place, the domestic sounds take over. A baby crying in the house next door, the sound of a woman singing a lullaby, the barking of the street dogs who are waking up for their nightly patrol. The temperature drops. In the desert, the night brings a sudden, sharp chill. The weaver reaches for his cloak, a woolen one, naturally, woven by his own hand, and wraps it around his shoulders. The warmth is immediate and comforting. It is a hug from his own craftsmanship. He watches his children chasing each other in the fading light. They are playing with a toy, a small chariot made of baked clay with wheels that actually turn. They laugh, their voices bright and clear in the evening air. He smiles. This is why he weaves. Not for the glory of the temple, not for the silver of the merchant, but for this, for the oil in the lamp, the grain in the jar, and the safety of these walls. He stands up slowly and gathers his cleaning rags. He places his stool against the wall. The courtyard is no longer a factory. It is a living room. The transition is complete. The tool is down, the lamp is lit, and the day is done. He turns toward the smell of the evening meal, leaving the loom to sleep under its cover, waiting for the sun to wake it again. The sun has vanished completely now. The world outside the heavy wooden door has dissolved into the absolute blackness of a desert night. In our modern cities, we have forgotten what true darkness looks like. We are bathed in the perpetual orange glow of streetlights. But here, when the sun goes down, the universe shuts off. The only light that remains is the one you make yourself. In the center of the room, a small clay lamp sits on a low wooden stand. It is a simple thing, really just a pinched bowl filled with the sesame oil the weaver bought in the bazaar, with a flaxwick floating in it. But when he touches a flame to it, it transforms. A soft, golden pool of light pushes back the shadows, creating a small, warm island of safety. The flame flickers slightly in the draught, making the shadows of the family dance on the mud brick walls giant, elongated figures that seem to mimic their movements. The evening meal is finished. The work is done. Now is the time for the mind to wander. The family gathers around the lamp. They sit on cushions stuffed with wool, leaning against the walls or against each other. This is the ancient cinema, the television, the library, and the internet, all rolled into one flickering flame. The weaver clears his throat. He is not a priest or a scribe. He cannot read the complex cuneiform tablets stored in the temple libraries. But he carries a library in his head. In a culture of oral tradition, the memory is a muscle honed by generations of listening. He begins to speak, his voice dropping to a low, rhythmic chant that fits the pulse of the flickering light. He tells them the story of the beginning. Long ago, he whispers, when the heavens were not yet named, and the earth below had not yet been called into existence. He tells them of the great gods, of Enki, the god of wisdom and water, who lives in the Abzu, the sweet-water ocean beneath the earth. He tells them of Enlil, the god of the air and the storm, and tonight, he tells them the favorite story, the one that every child in Mesopotamia knows by heart, the story of the Great Flood. It begins with a bit of a domestic dispute among the divine. It seems that long ago, the gods created humans to do the work for them, to dig the canals and harvest the grain. But the humans multiplied. They became many, and, as humans tend to be, they became loud. There is a witty, relatable truth at the heart of this ancient apocalypse. The gods didn't send the flood because humans were sinful or evil. They sent it because we were too noisy. Enlil, the chief god, was trying to take a nap, and the humans were making such a racket that he couldn't sleep. It is the ultimate keep-it-down complaint, escalated to a geological catastrophe. If you have ever had noisy upstairs neighbors, you might sympathize with Enlil. Though drowning the world does seem like a bit of an overreaction. The weaver describes the hero, Atrahasis or Utnapishtim, depending on the version. A wise man who was warned by the god Enki. Tear down your house, the god whispered to him through a reed wall. Build a boat, leave your possessions and save your life. The children listen with wide eyes, even though they have heard this story 100 times. They picture the boat. The weaver describes it not as the pointed ship they saw on the river today, but as something stranger. Here is a fascinating scholarly debate that has flared up recently. For centuries, we pictured this ark as a traditional ship, but a recently translated tablet suggests that the ark of the original Mesopotamian myth was actually a giant round coracle, a massive version of the guffer basket boats used on the river, or perhaps even a perfect cube. Historians and engineers still argue whether a cubic boat could actually float without tumbling over in the waves. The children, however, don't care about the hydrodynamics. They just imagine a giant, floating house, sealed with bitumen, bobbing like a cork on the endless ocean. The weaver's voice rises and falls, mimicking the storm. He tells of the wind that screamed like a demon. He tells of the black clouds that turned the day into night. He describes how the water rose, covering the walls, covering the palaces, covering even the tops of the mountains, until the world was nothing but silence and water. The family huddles closer together. The oil lamp sputters, a spark jumping, and the shadows leap. The darkness outside feels a little closer, a little heavier. But then the storm breaks. The weaver tells of the window being opened. He tells of the birds being sent out, the dove who came back, the swallow who came back, and finally the raven who did not return, finding a place to land. The boat grounds on a mountain. The life of the world steps out onto the mud. It is a story of survival. It is a story that says, the water can rise, the gods can be angry, but we are still here as the story winds down. The weaver mentions the scorpion men who guard the gates of the sun, and the Galu demons who try to drag people to the netherworld. The children shiver, but it is a safe shiver to protect them from these invisible threats. The room is guarded by its own monsters. Hanging on the wall, just at the edge of the lamplight, is a small clay plaque. It depicts a terrifying creature with the face of a lion, the teeth of a dog, and the talons of an eagle. This is Pazuzu. In a quirky twist of ancient logic, Pazuzu is a demon, yes, but he is a good demon. Or at least, he is a demon you want on your side. He is the king of the wind demons, and his job is to scare away the other. Worse demons, specifically the malicious Lamashtu, who attacks pregnant women and babies. It's a protection racket. You put up a picture of the bully to keep the other bullies away. He is the original beware of dog sign. The story ends. The silence rushes back into the room, but it feels less heavy now. It is filled with the images of the myth, the great waters, the saving boat, the clever god. The weaver stretches, his joints popping in the quiet. The lamp is running low on oil. The flame is getting smaller, shrinking into a tiny orange bead. The storytelling has done its job. The adrenaline of the day has faded. The children's eyelids are drooping. The boundary between the waking world and the dream world is thinning, just like the smoke drifting up from the wick. To bed, the weaver whispers. They do not have individual bedrooms in the modern sense. They sleep on mats, often in the same room or on the roof if it is hot. But tonight, they stay inside. They unroll the reed mats. They pull the woolen blankets woven on that very loom outside up to their chins. The weaver blows out the lamp. The darkness is instant and total. But it is not empty. It is filled with the smell of the dying wick, the warmth of the family, and the lingering echo of the story. The flood has receded. The boat is safe. The night has officially begun. The lamp is out. The flame has been extinguished, and the thin trail of smoke has long since vanished into the rafters. The room is dark, but as the weaver's eyes adjust, the absolute blackness softens into a landscape of grey shadows. Light from the moon, the great lantern of the god Nana, spills into the courtyard and filters through the open doorway, painting a pale rectangle on the floor. The weaver lies on his back. The reed mat beneath him is firm, pressing against his shoulder blades. It is a grounding sensation, a reminder of the earth from which everything in his life springs: the mud of the bricks, the clay of the tablets, the reeds of the river. He pulls the woolen blanket up to his chin. It is rougher than the linen he wove for the goddess today, but it is warm, and it smells faintly of the family storehouse of grain and dried herbs. Beside him, the rhythm of his family's breathing creates a soft, human cadence. It is a sound of peace. In the chaos of the day, with the shouting of the market and the clatter of the loom, it is easy to forget that this is the purpose of it all. This quiet, this safety. As he drifts towards sleep, his mind begins to loosen its grip on the inventory of the day. The count of the warp threads fades. The price of the red dye dissolves. He enters the domain of Zakar, the messenger of the moon god, the lord of dreams. To the people of your sleep is not merely a biological pause. It is a spiritual journey. It is a time when the protective barrier between the worlds grows thin. A dream is not just a random firing of neurons. It is a message. This leads us to a quirky, fascinating reality of their nightlife, the obsession with dream omens. If our weaver were to dream tonight that he is eating a fish, he would wake up happy, for the dream books say it means prosperity. If he dreams he is carrying a heavy stone, it means he will find favor with his superior. There were entire tablets, massive encyclopedias of sleep dedicated to decoding these night visions. They covered everything from losing teeth, bad luck for the family, to walking in an orchard joy. The anxiety of the waking world was managed by the certainty of the dream book. But for now, there are no dreams. Only the heavy, comfortable weight of rest. Outside, the city of yore has undergone a transformation. The bustling metropolis of noise and commerce has become a necropolis of silence. The narrow streets, which were so choked with donkeys and porters a few hours ago, are now empty canyons of shadow. The only movement is the occasional patrol of the city watch, their torches flickering as they walk the perimeter, or perhaps the silent glide of an owl hunting the mice that scurry near the grain silos. Above it all, the sky stretches out a vast crushing dome of obsidian and diamonds. We must pause to appreciate the Mesopotamian sky. There is no light pollution here, no street lights, no neon signs, no headlights. When the people of yore looked up, they saw a universe so crowded with stars that it looked like spilled milk. This is a mainstream historical fact that connects us directly to them. They were the first true astronomers. They didn't just look at the stars. They measured them. They projected their myths onto the canvas of the night. When they looked up, they didn't see random points of light. They saw the great twins, Gemini, the lion Leo, and the bull of heaven Taurus. They gave us the zodiac. The mathematics they used to track the movement of Venus across the sky was so precise that it would not be matched until the European Renaissance. Historians still argue whether structures like the Great Ziggurat were used as astronomical observatories, high platforms to lift the priests above the dust of the atmosphere, to chart the seasons, or, if their height was purely symbolic, a stairway for the god to descend. Was it science, or was it theology? To the weaver, drifting off in his small room, there is no difference. The stars are the writing of the gods, and the priests are the ones who can read it. The air in the room cools further. The heat of the day is finally releasing its grip on the mud bricks. The thermal mass of the house, which kept them cool at noon, now radiates a gentle, stored warmth into the chill of the night. It is a perfect, passive system of climate control, designed by thousands of years of desert living. The weaver shifts, turning onto his side. He curls his hand under his cheek. His fingers, still stained with the day's indigo, rest near his face. Even in sleep, he is marked by his trade far away. Beyond the city walls, the shepherds we met this morning are sleeping too, wrapped in their sheepskin cloaks under the open sky, their flocks huddled around them. The boatman is sleeping on the deck of his reed ship, rocking gently on the current of the river. The scribe is sleeping in his quarter, his soft hands resting after a day of pressing wedges into clay. And the river, the great Euphrates, it does not sleep. It flows on, black and silent, sliding past the sleeping city. It carries the silt of the mountains, the runoff of the fields, and the secrets of the ancestors. It flows toward the sea, just as it has for 10,000 years, and just as it will for 10,000 more. It is the heartbeat of the land, a pulse that is slower and deeper than any human life. The weaver's breathing deepens. The last tension leaves his jaw. He is gone now, slipped away into the dark, velvety embrace of the night. He is no longer a weaver, a father, or a subject of the king. He is simply a breathing soul, resting in the cradle of civilization, the city of your sleeps. The great experiment of living together, of building walls and laws and looms, takes a pause. The stars wheel overhead in their silent, mathematical dance. The moon watches over the roofs. And tomorrow, when the sun turns the mud bricks to gold once more, the wheel will turn again. But for now, there is only peace. And so, we leave him there. We leave the weaver to his rest, safe within the thick walls of his home. We leave the city of yore to the silence of the desert night. We step back, moving quietly away from the sleeping house, away from the loom covered in its linen sheet, away from the cooling courtyard. We float up above the narrow, winding streets, above the sleeping markets, and above the great silhouette of the ziggurat. From this height, the city is just a texture in the dark, a pattern of shadows resting on the banks of the eternal river. The sounds of the ancient world fade away completely. There is no more clatter of the shuttle, no more chanting of the priests, no more rustle of the wind in the palm trees. There is only a deep, abiding stillness. It is the same stillness that waits for you. The same stars that looked down on the weaver are looking down on you tonight, all waiting just behind the daylight, eternal and calm. The timeline of history may be long, filled with noise and activity, but the night is always the same. It is a shared sanctuary, a place where time stops, where the work is put away, and where the mind can finally let go. You have walked the dusty road. You have seen the colors of the dye. You have felt the rhythm of the loom. Now the journey is over. The thread has been cut. The pattern is complete. Let your own breathing find that slow, ancient rhythm. Let your shoulders drop, just as the weavers did. Let the heaviness of the day slide off you, leaving you light and free. The river of time flows on, carrying everything safely through the night. You don't need to do anything else. You don't need to be anyone else. You can just be. Drift along the current. The water is smooth. The dark is soft. Sleep is waiting to welcome you, just as it welcomed them thousands of years ago.